Welcome back to the Nullified Take, where we've got the TNT takes for you on The Amazing Race, Season 33, and I am joined by a very special guest. She's one half of the dominant female duo this season, I should say, on The Amazing Race 33. Cayla, thank you for coming onto the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing amazing. I thank you for having me. This is honestly such a surprise, and I love getting to share this experience. And I mean, yeah, thank you for having me. I can't wait to just dive in.
Yeah, well done on all of the content that you and Dusty have been putting out all this season as well. Like, I'm one of those podcasters, I can't listen to anybody else and their takes because I like it to be raw and authentic, especially when I'm watching the episodes, and that way I can have my own opinion about it. Normally misinformed because obviously, let's be honest, we watch an edited show, but it's a lot more fun watching it that way than sometimes immediately getting the behind the scenes. So if I do ask you anything that you've already clarified or you've already spoken to that on your podcast, please excuse me for that. I haven't
Oh,
watched all of it.
no worries. No worries.
Well, Kayla, let's start off from the beginning. Were you a fan of The Amazing Race before you signed up for this? And who was approached first? Was it yourself or Raquel?
So I was a diehard fan of Amazing Race. I grew up watching Amazing Race, Survivor, Big Brother with my mom. I mean, ever since middle school. So I was definitely the fan of the show. And Raquel, she was the one that was actually contacted. She was, in news in Chicago and was previously on a show called Love Connection. It was not aired, but her name was kind of already circulating. She's as you can see, great television. So no, she was actually contacted and she just asked me to be her partner. And it's a funny story how that happened because her and I lived together in New York. We're both flight attendants based out of New York. So there's a brief moment where we really didn't spend a lot of time in the apartment. We were just go, go, go. But we had a bachelor night where we all sat down with our girlfriends, had some wine, watched The Bachelor, and we were like, "Oh, would you ever go on that show? Or if you could ever be on a show, what would you do?" And like all the girls, of course, like, "Oh my god, I would totally do The Bachelor." A bunch of single girls in New York. I was like, no, I want to be on The Amazing Race. I was like, "Oh my god, like that'd be so cool. It's travel. It's right up my alley." No lie, maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, she called me and is like, was that you that said you'd wanna be on The Amazing Race?" And I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, do you wanna be on The Amazing Race with me?" And I was like, "Shut up." And here we are.
That's such a crazy story, and I believe very much that, the energy and the vibes that you put out there in the universe, that sometimes comes back to you. So for anybody out there that's listening to this podcast and that think that, I can't do that show, or I can't apply or anything like that, just put yourself out there, right? Take the risk. And
Yes.
having that conversation with Raquel, ended up with you being on the show. So I'm quite interested, as someone that was a fan of the show before you went on, what was your expectations of it going in, and how was it different to what you expected the show to be? And I mean, I guess this was an unprecedented season, right?
Yes. Yeah, so it's really hard. Nothing could have prepared any of us for what was this season, 33 of The Amazing Race with COVID and the pandemic and everything going on. But just being a fan of the show, I more so expected, Amazing Race, Bertram, he loves the costumes. He loves those attention to detail, the artistic creative challenges. So I knew that there would be an element of physicality there. But that was where I was going to rely on Raquel. Like I do see myself as a physical person. I, played sports, but my strengths was in the show and being a fan of the show. And that is, the attention to detail, the memorization, that kind of stuff. So I expected it to be honestly like what I watched, ever since middle school. Um, However, I did not anticipate, and nor could I have prepared for it being the hardest thing I've ever done. It's so hard because, as fans of the show and as like, just normal human beings, we were the average Joes of this season. Like we weren't viral, we weren't known for anything. We're not comfortable being in front of the camera. We were truly average Joes. And so to fight for $1 million against the people that we were up against and be on TV for the first time and just put that enormous pressure on yourself is just something you cannot prepare for. But also with that being said, it's easy as a fan of the show to be like, "Oh, I would have done that," or "Why didn't they do that?" And like when you're in the moment, I talk about it constantly on the podcast with Dusty and Pit Stop podcast. You have these blinders on where you can only focus on the task in front of you. Um, and it's an enormous amount of pressure. And people argue that this was not a difficult season because we didn't have, the airport run-ins or, catching flights or sitting in a taxi cab with traffic or no, control over where you're going. I would take all of those things any day over self-drive. Because
Mm.
when we came back, it was all self drive. And to be in another country with different signage, you're on the opposite side of the road. More times than not, it was stick shift. Whoa, buddy. That was unbelievably stressful that no human being can prepare for. So,
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because obviously, as a flight attendant, someone that has to navigate, through airports on a consistent basis, I'm well traveled. Like, I've spent time living in America. I lived in Texas for 9 months. I lived in
ah,
London for 2 years. I obviously moved to New Zealand, originally from South Africa. And I've traveled to a lot of countries, so I know what it's like to be in airports and to navigate. And I felt like you guys lost a little bit of that secret sauce, that thing that would have given you a heads up compared to other teams when it wasn't there. So in a lot of cases, it was probably even more difficult because you needed to find a different strength. You thought you had this superpower coming in that was taken away.
I'm so grateful that you bring that up because sometimes I forget to mention it. Um, it was a massive strength of ours that, it unfortunately was kind of taken away indirectly. Not only just the navigation of airports themselves, because I feel like those kinds of things you can figure out and become accustomed to and get better at, but more so like the time differences and being on the go and living out of a suitcase and having and running on little sleep and like, the jet lag, just little stuff
Mm.
like that. And I mean, it was put out there, it's shared over and over again. We had to run a different race because of COVID and the safety protocols that were put in place, where we had 24 to 48 hours where we were COVID tested before we could be released again. So that's now downtime that other teams and ourselves get. But a strength of ours was going to be we can run, burning the candle at both ends and kind of running on low fumes, where other teams kind of had a level playing field because we all got equal rest in a sense, where I think the natural go and go that is the amazing race was taken away a little bit so other teams could kind of catch up and get that rest. So yeah, I think it was such a strength that was indirectly kind of taken away from Raquel and I. And yeah, we had to find our strengths in other areas because if people had to go, go, go like we normally would have, I think they would have worn down a little bit more than obviously it played out. So
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that. I didn't realize that you had 24 hours in between legs, and that definitely changes the race quite a bit. There was one leg that looked a little bit different compared to most, and I believe it was the one after you had the rowing challenge and you guys were sleeping out in tents, and a lot of drama happened on that episode, which we definitely will get into at some point. But how was that different? Did you still have to quarantine for as long? Was it still 24 hours living in those tents, or was that a little bit of a shorter leg? And did you get to at least, I guess, have some time with some of the other teams in between scenes? Because one of the things that stood out for me is that in the early seasons, we sometimes see teams interact either at the airport or they interact in between legs, but we didn't really get to see any of that footage this season.
yeah, so that was a massive point of communication that we got with the teams, was that camping episode. Um, when we have all this downtime, we don't get to interact with the other team. So even though we have like, the 24 hours where we're being COVID tested and waiting for results so we can safely go out and travel and safely go and run in these countries, we're in lockdown. I'm with Raquel and Raquel only. Where there might have been more context, like you said, where there were episodes where people sleep in the airport. That's hours that you can have communication with teams and create bonds and alliances that we ultimately didn't have. Now, granted, we did have the 19 months of kind of time frame to maybe scope out some people on the cast. But no, that campfire night was by far goes down in my book as my favorite pit stop because we finally got to all interact. We are truly like camping in tents alongside a river. We had a campfire, which there was obviously cameras and a little bit that you get to see on like the YouTube channels from Amazing Race. They share a little bit of that. But no, we got to get to know each other on a personal level because even during the 19 months of COVID where we could technically kind of talk and reach out to the other castmates. I didn't get to see them. Like there wasn't travel. Everyone's going through their own thing. Raquel and I lost our jobs. This was truly in the race. We are sitting face to face with these castmates that are unbelievably awesome human beings. But we're getting to get to know them a little bit, to where each leg after that was like personal almost. It's like
Hmm.
you felt bad someone getting eliminated, but that's one more down and getting you closer to the finale. But it's like that catch 22, I guess. But no, the best was the campfire, because we finally got to interact with everyone and we weren't like locked away in our hotel rooms away from everybody.
Yes. I get to talk to a lot of Australian survivors, survivors from South Africa. Like, obviously, Survivor is a global franchise, so I've interviewed quite a lot of them. And I had a previous Australian survivor on the channel last week to recap the latest week of what happened over in Australia, which was a pretty hectic one as well, with a lot of drama. But one of the things about having a previous player on the shows, he spoke about the fact that when you go on these shows, you're truly there with people that are, really unique, and that they're A-type personalities. These are very charismatic people that you want to become friends with. So
Mhm.
bonds just get created that much quicker out there. So I'm kind of interested. You mentioned that you finally got that opportunity to talk to different teams, and obviously there was 19 months in between where you guys could scope different people out. Obviously, no alliance talk would have happened. Let's be real. Especially for this podcast, definitely that wouldn't have happened. But you know, when you're out there, who are the teams that you were closest to? And obviously you have a podcast now with Dusty.
Mhm.
How surprised were you that you were shown not liking Dusty on the edit, and they really made a big deal of showing your reaction every time he celebrated?
Yeah, so it's just so funny. Like we became so close with everyone, but if I had to pinpoint certain people, Kim and Penn definitely were our strongest allies or friends. Again, there were no alliances this season, and that's the truth. Honestly, everyone wanted to run their own race and give it their all. But with that being said, Kim and Penn were the first team that we met in the Charlotte airport when we first started pre-COVID. And again, we're like these two single girls, kind of like all over the place, just having a good time. And like they were truly like our like mom and dad of the race. They had this sense of calmness and like looking over us. Granted, they were, our ultimate downfall in the end. But no, like Kim and
Can
Penn
I
were
ask a
just like,
question on that? Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt your train of thought, but
no,
it's something
you're fine.
that we I had a chat with Michelle about this, who's my co-host on the channel. And Kim and Penn being these lovely two older people that were like a mom and dad on the race, do you think that's what sort of lowered their threat level when they should have been
Yes.
seen as the ultimate target?
Yes. I mean, I think easily everyone just in their young, like egotistical mind are like, oh, they're like this older couple. And like sometimes like couples don't always it sometimes brings out the worst in a couple team dynamic. That definitely was not the case in Kim and with Kim and Penn. But I definitely helped them fly under the radar initially. Coming back from COVID, I think they didn't fly under the radar so much because people kind of like got to know, like, okay, like they're like comfortable in front of the camera and they know what they're doing and they have such a great, awesome relationship between the two of them. And if you're a fan of The Amazing Race, you know what wins is a good, healthy team dynamic. And they had that. So, yes, I definitely think that helped them be underestimated initially for sure.
To go back to
um,
and that kind of answers the question, and I thought it may. If I was out there, I'd probably be the same. I'd be like, I'm a young guy, I can outrun them. But
yeah,
they had so many skills that just transferred really well to the race, and a lot of
yes.
the roadblocks and things like that came up. Just to go back to the Dusty question. Obviously, you are close with Dusty now. You guys do a podcast together. How surprised were you that they really honed in on your comments and your facial expression every time Dusty was celebrating and living his
Yes.
best life?
So listen, like I am someone like I talk with my hands, I talk with my face, I can't control it. Like there's no hiding it. My mom is always like, your face is gonna speak your truth. Um, I truly in the moment, like I'm best friends with Dusty. Even going back and during that moment, I'm best friends with him. But we all had this understanding of I want to kick your butt. Like I want to win. I want to beat you. And if there's moments of him getting in his head, like there were some moments where like I just couldn't help but like poke the bear a little bit, because he would do the same thing to us. Like, before the finale leg, he's like, I hope you guys realize this is the first time that we're all running together. We don't have the 15-minute lag. Like, you guys haven't ran this race yet with us on even playing field. You're going down today. It's like that's just like the competitive nature in us young adults, as two genuine people that love each other. But it's so funny. I did get a lot of heat for like oh, they want to show their muscles and whatever. That's just my personality. Like I'm self-deprecating. I have poorly timed humor. But also from a level of like caring about him, he was like foam was like coming out of his mouth, smoke was coming out of his ears after that kayak, and he's like, yeah, like, went from last to third. And he's just like, he was just so in the moment and so intense, where like just the friend in me want to be like, dude, that's freaking awesome. Like, smile, crack a smile, please. So it was almost like trying to crack a joke and getting your friend to like get out of that headspace of, oh, like I was in last. And I'm like, dude, crack a smile. You got third. You're good. I obviously caught some heat for it, but I don't regret it. Dusty knows it's all love there. But yeah, dude, I'm going to poke the bear where I can, because this is $1 million. And however I can get into their head, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, no, listen, I fully appreciated that, and I think that we went on a journey with your edit, both Raquel and your edit throughout the season, where in the beginning we didn't really get to know you guys as much, and as you became this badass all-female team out there,
Thank
really
you.
doing well, taking names, even for myself, it took a episode or two of digesting this. No, listen, Cayla and Raquel, they're playing to win this thing, and you've got to do anything you can to get to the end and win $1 million. Like you said, it's a lot of money. So,
Yeah.
how did you feel about how the fan reception was and how people saw the move where you guys left Lulu and Lala behind? Because obviously there was a lot of personal things going on, and then
Yes.
obviously you guys made that choice where, at first glance, I was like, man, that was a dirty move. But then in the next recap, I was like, you know what? If I was them, I would have done the exact same thing.
Yeah, and it's so funny watching back. And we do a podcast with Lulu and Lala where they had Raquel and I on there just to kind of like explain our side of the things. In the moment, it's so emotional, like, oh, how dare they?
Hmm.
It was hard for me to kind of speak on it initially because I didn't do that roadblock. But now, obviously, in hindsight, Raquel picked the only female guide to do that canyoning challenge. And when Lala, I'm still to this
I
day,
think
I confuse them, but it was Lulu and Raquel, and they're doing the roadblock, and they had initially had a bond of let's find the clue together, because it was like if you pass the clue, you had to do it all over again. Now, looking at it, that clue is right in front of your face. Like, you can get it. Now, Lulu helped untangle it and, like, waited for Raquel, but to wait for Raquel, she kind of had to wait for Raquel to grab it and hand it down to her. So I think it was a miscommunication of we're going to do the whole four eyes are better than two to find the clue. And at that moment, Raquel's mind, she was like, well, once we find the clue, I've in a sense like, you know, completed what we discussed as far as working together. But I think the fault initially ends up being on the guide that Raquel had. She goes, okay, you have the clue. Like, do you want to go? Do you want to go fast? Raquel's like, hell yeah, I want to go fast. And so she's like, I honestly just like blacked everything out. And my guide was like, I'm the only female guide going against these other male guides. Thank you for picking me. And like, I want to beast mode my way through it. So Raquel was like, yeah, no question. Let's do it. And in hindsight, we truly feel so bad. But would we change what we did? No, because I fully had confidence that Lulu was going to be fine. And so did Raquel, to where it wasn't ever a moment of we thought that they would get behind or even get eliminated by us just moving forward in that challenge. That kind of stems from just the way that Raquel and I view like women empowerment. And I know that I'm not going to not everyone's going to agree with me on this. I didn't think that they needed our help. I don't think Raquel thought that they needed our help in that way. So for them to kind of be like, oh, like this is a perfect example of like women not supporting women, it was never supposed to be something like that. It was just, I thought that they were fine. Raquel were like, oh, she's got the clue, she's good. And like, we kind of just like never looked back. We feel terrible looking back. I guess there should have been more communication of like, let's stick together to make sure that the boys don't overcome. But then I look at it as like, if we stuck together and like, if we would have fallen behind on the kayaking, like maybe we wouldn't have gotten second. Again, that's a selfish move and it's not going to be the public favorite. But we genuinely, that's why we didn't do alliances. I wanted to root for Lulu and Lala, and we were all about girl power, but I wanted to run our own race. Me being a fan, season 32, not a fan favorite, like a lot of people had these alliances that carried them through. And I was like, I don't want that. If I'm going to make it to the final, I want it to be because of Raquel and I's performance. I feel bad about it, but I completely understand where they're coming from and where that was kind of a letdown on our end. I apologized for it. It was never deliberate, but I mean, it's just that's the race, man. We were
I think the
done.
real ones, I think the real ones understand. And like I said, I mean, I had to check myself even because when that happened immediately, Lulu and Lala was my favorite team this season. So I was like, how dare you do that to my girls,
I
And then
know.
and then I had to wait for the next episode, and I was like, you know what? I can't blame them for it. And it's kind of where double standard sometimes comes in because if this was two guys teams out there, would it have been seen in the same way? I don't know. People would have just said it's a ruthless cutthroat move and they're going to go to the end and potentially win the season. Now, talking about being an all-girl team out there, I had a conversation with Lulu and Lala last week where they spoke about some of the difficulties of being an all-female team that I, as a
Yes.
viewer, didn't even appreciate or realize because it didn't make its way onto the camera necessarily. But she mentioned that there were some cultural shocks when you went into certain countries when it came to communicating with locals and things like that. And she said that they had an experience of that in Greece, and
Yes.
potentially you guys had something similar as well, but they didn't want to talk to that. What specifically happened out there, and what made it difficult as an all-girl female to navigate through some of these countries that culturally are a little bit different, I guess, to America?
Yeah, so Lulu and Lala had a unique experience just because one, they look identical. And so I think for like two females to be running up to like a group of males in Greece, it was just a little bit like, whoa, like what's coming at me, and then there's cameras and all that good, all that stuff. But the experience that we kind of had, like when you're in the US, it's almost like just like that social awareness. It has nothing to do with the culture. It's just we got lost at one point in Greece, or we had to like take a wrong turn. And Raquel and I were very much so like, before we ever make a turn, let's stop and ask someone. It might take a second, but I'd rather take a second to get, hey, we're still going in the right direction, opposed to take 15 minutes because we went in the wrong direction. And yeah, just in Greece, just where we were specifically, it was heavily male dominated. Like, I don't think, other than the woman who served us the souvlaki at Mamos, I don't think I saw a female. Every single person we asked directions from was a male. And again, like, we're obviously foreign. We have cameras behind us. It was almost like a play it safe. I don't know, like, I don't want to help you kind of thing. To where it was kind of hard getting assistance, yeah, just because we were two females coming up to them that clearly weren't local. In the end, I don't think it had a big play in like the outcome, but it was the first time where I was like, ooh, like I don't think very comfortable for the men of Greece that we ran up to like in that setting. So
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the things that you don't necessarily realize as a fan. You watch the show that sometimes there can be these differences in different countries that can make it very difficult to race. And I think
yeah.
it's a subtlety really that I didn't pick up on at all.
Yes.
How did you feel about as a fan playing this show, being out there? Potentially missing out on so many other locations, like for instance, Asia as a continent, Africa, South America. There's a few places you couldn't go to. Obviously, you would have been happy just to play the show to begin with, but do you feel like, you missed out somewhat? And would this make you hungry to go back and do the Amazing Race again?
So my initial reaction going back, knowing that we had to do it in a COVID safe way, I was like, oh, like I was really hoping, yeah, to go. I wanted to go to South Africa. I wanted to go to places in Asia that I hadn't been to, like New Zealand. I was just like, I just wanted to go to those countries that are so vastly different from my own country. But then the first place we went, Alstaten in Switzerland, it was just breathtaking. And I'd never seen that before. And then we went to Lugano, Switzerland, which I never heard of. Breathtaking. Then Corti, Corsica, breathtaking. To where, like, initially I was like, oh, we don't get to go to these places. And then I very quickly humbled myself down and was like, I've never heard of any of these cities. I've never been to these areas of these countries. And I wouldn't be here, nor would I ever find out about them if it wasn't for the Amazing Race. And that's what I love about the show is it brings light to so many new places in this world that I would have never known. Does it leave me with that hunger of like, I want to go to just because again, Europe for the most part is a little bit more comfortable for Americans. Maybe I shouldn't make that blanket statement. I'll let people speak for themselves. But just as someone who travels, like Europe is a pretty comfortable place, in my opinion, to travel. Whereas, like, if I were to go to South Africa and these places in Asia where you just see these absolutely blatant culture difference, it would have been exciting. I wanted that. And so does it leave me with a little bit hope that like they would ask me back and I get to see some of those things? I hope so. But yeah, my initial reaction, I was a little disappointed, but then I very quickly was like, oh no, these are epic locations, like unbelievably beautiful. Like Bertram and Elise, like 10 out of 10, like blew it out of the water with the places that we got to go to.
Yeah. I think South Africa, you'd be fine. Like, you'll find that the culture, as a South African, having lived there for 18 years of my life growing up,
I
and
want to go
still
so
I go back.
bad.
I go back very often. Like, I go, like, obviously at the moment I can't because everything's locked down for New
Yeah,
Zealanders. We're not allowed to travel as much at this stage. But, I will go back probably at some stage in the middle of this year or the end of this year. It's very Western to a big degree. It's still got its roots and it's got the African culture to it. But I think you would find it easier to navigate. But there are certain areas in Africa, like if you were to go mid or central Africa, where there would be a big cultural shock, because it will be very different. And similar
right.
to countries like certain Asian countries where the language that they speak isn't English, and that could be interesting. But you guys did, I guess, experience a little bit of that language barriers in some of the European countries as well.
Yes, we experienced it in Greece, we experienced it in Portugal, Lisbon, honestly, even in Glasgow, Scotland. The accent that they had was
Mm,
so unbelievably thick that getting directions was probably the hardest throughout, like, looking back hindsight, Glasgow was actually the hardest country for us to communicate in because of that thick accent. Um but that's the stuff that I love, and that's the stuff that I wanted to experience, like, going on the show, and it might not have been to the caliber of what I had initially anticipated, but my expectations were still blown out of the water for sure.
Now, I know that you're not a fan of sardines and you said you would rather not eat it, but if you had to choose between the sardines and the maggot cheese, which way would you go?
Ugh, that's so hard because I didn't actually have to eat the sardines, but when you look at the can, when Phil, like, opened it up, I was like, "Ugh." I I probably picked the sardines because at least those look more moist. Like, y'all, this maggot cheese was so dry, it lingered in my mouth the whole day. So it wasn't like, "Oh, I did it, I put it down, we can move on." No, like the rest of the day, like TMI, I was like burping it up and it was just like you when you put your mask on, it's like right in your nose. I was like, "Oh, it was horrible." I would pick the sardines for sure. I honestly would probably pick sardines over Vegemite too. I know that that's like an Australian thing, but like I'm like, ugh, not for me.
Again, I'm not from Australia or New Zealand originally. I don't get the Vegemite thing either, but like saying that out loud, they might just take my citizenship back and kick me out of the country.
Sorry to put you in that position.
Now, you mentioned quite a few locations that you travel to over in Europe. Like, if you were to talk to fans that watch the show and give them a little bit of advice in regards to those countries, which ones would you, I guess, want to travel back to, or say this is like the
Oh,
highest one on the list? You've got to see it. The Switzerland one to me was amazing with the mountain, by the way, where you could see all the different countries in one spot. I would
mhm.
imagine that would be pretty high up. Is there any other locations that you would say this is a must if you ever get to Europe?
The 2, hands down, Lugano, Switzerland. It is on this massive lake that across the way is Italy. Um, Stunning. Like, literally took my breath away. Like, I was just like, everywhere I was looking, it was just this tropical, magical place in Switzerland across from Italy. I was like, "What? Where am I?" We actually, some of the cast and we have a plan to go to Lugano to do a little vacation. But the second place was Corti Corsica. It's just these insane marble cliffs that are ancient. I mean, ancient. And it almost looks like the buildings are like carved out of the stone of the cliff. Um, uh, you're just so high up and it's just like that coastline. And I'm just big on like, I want like a vast difference in what I'm used to. And that Corti Corsica was just so ancient is like the word I just keep coming back to. That you truly, I just felt like I was like in this magical fairy tale like land. I was like, where am I? Where that Lugano was just that like beautiful tropical, like this is where I want to vacation and have a cocktail. So Lugano and Corti Corsica, hands down, I will be going to both 100%.
I'll remember that if I go to, I've got plans to go to France in 2023 and maybe
Oh,
do a little bit of
please
a
go.
European trip as well. So I'll remember, and if I do forget, I'll reach out to you guys to remind me
Yes,
of the two
please
names
do.
of where I should go visit when I go over
Yes.
there. Um, I wanted to ask you, obviously, you guys, went through a little bit of difficulty losing your jobs during this period of
Mhm.
time and, coming back to the race. How difficult of a decision was it to come back, do the race with everything that happened at home, everything that went on over the last couple of years? Was this something that you guys took quite a while to decide, yes, this is right for us? And then secondly, who were you shocked not to see come back?
So it actually did take us a little back and forth. I was always gung ho of I want to go back. I will go back. Like I hope they bring us back. Raquel was a little bit more so. Yeah, we went through like a really hard time mentally, just losing our jobs. And granted, we got them back within a year because of like the government grants that the US gave and, just the way that the airlines were able to recover themselves. But we went into it going furloughed, being told this could take years for you to go, you to get, get your job back. Where we were like, we had quit our previous careers to become flight attendants. And so we were like, what are we going to do? Like, we had to move back home with our parents. It was just like a complete shift of what we knew to be our day-to-day life, and that day-to-day life encompassed travel. So not only did we just lose our jobs, but now you're going to take away the travel aspect of it. And I don't mean to sound insensitive, but like it's really just like how we identified with ourselves was being able to travel and be on the go and see new countries and see new cities, and that's being taken away because of this pandemic. So add on, now I don't have a job. um to where when we were asked back, it was an easy decision in the sense of, wait, we get to travel again? Like they found a safe way to do this? Like, yes, like please, like we want to go back. With the also the added element of we did struggle mentally with kind of like our identity, and like we lost our careers, and can we go back and be on camera? Like, is this going to be socially accepted that we're traveling again? But again, CBS and Amazing Race and Elise and Bertram found this unbelievably safe way to do it to where not a single person caught COVID. Just the protocols they had set in place to where it was such an easy decision, because the second we got back and we got on the plane, I could see it in Raquel. Like, she's my best friend. I know her. And I was like, we like feel like ourselves again. Like, we're on a plane going to another country, which we haven't done in 19 months. Like, we're getting a piece of like our identity back. Like the Amazing Race was just a bonus, but like just getting be able to like travel again, it was a no brainer for us. But the people that I was really shocked that didn't come back, um, were Spencer and Anthony. I think that they were a massive threat, a big physical male duo. And they had honestly like run the race with such ease. Um, I was shocked. I was shocked that they weren't back. I also was shocked that Coach and Connie weren't back. When I found out why, that obviously made sense. Coach and Connie had a baby, little Elijah Rock. But they just had such this hunger for like they wanted to win, and they were one of the first teams we saw in the airport. So when they weren't back, I was like, what do you mean Coach isn't back? Like, where's he at?
Mhm.
Like, I know he wants this million. So those were the two teams I was disappointed and shocked that weren't back.
I feel like we as fans really missed out not seeing those teams come back. They were
Yeah.
two early favorites of mine as well. So I hope we do get to see them in a future season and they can make an exception for some of these players that didn't get to finish their race. I did want to ask you, you guys came back and did extremely well. Like you had a third, fourth, and a sixth place in the beginning, but then you just consistently started kicking butt, like going to second place, two first places leading into the finale. What is it that you guys went and worked on? And did you work on anything when you went onto this break? Because you had a very unique opportunity where other racers have never had the ability to go on the race, see what their strengths and weaknesses are, get a bit of a taste for it, and then get to go and work on it.
Yeah, so the biggest thing was the driving and navigating. Initially, when we went on the show, Raquel did not know how to drive stick. I like learned that was like one of the first ways I learned how to drive a car when I was like 14. So I knew how to drive stick. So I was like, that's gonna be me. Like, we'll figure out the navigation. But then it was funny when we go on, she's like, Cayla, I don't know how to read a map. And I was like, what? This is gonna be a problem, as it showed in Scotland. But that when we went home and were asked back, I was like, Raquel, you have got to learn how to drive stick because I can a map is my best friend. I'm like the biggest nerd ever. Like when I go to like touristy destinations, I know I can use my phone. I'm like, do you guys have a map somewhere? Like I just love a freaking map. I will like I'm obsessed. So I was like, I want to navigate. I want you to drive because I'm also from the South. I'm like a 10 and 2 grandma kind of driver. Whereas like she grew up in Chicago. She's like laying on the horn, going over curbs. Like she's the more aggressive one. It was the best change for us, just from a mental standpoint too. Like I was supposed to do the bagpipe challenge and everyone talks about how our roadblocks were off balance,
Mm.
and we went into it wanting to alternate, but I was so stressed out from driving in Scotland and getting lost and her not being able to navigate and just the stick shift looking on the opposite side of the road, to where when we got to the bagpipes, I'm like, Raquel, you have to do it. That was not initially our plan. So the driving, we got to correct that, which majorly came into play. But other than that, we just learned to slow the race down a little bit. Raquel has a very good way of sitting with things, and she's like, let's not overthink it, pause. It's almost like the, the whole turtle saying, like, the slowest, what's that turtle phrase, the slowest one wins the race or something, I don't
Yeah,
know.
something like that. Yeah.
I obviously the slowest one doesn't win the race, but when you slow it down and read the clue and pick the
Mm.
right partner to do a roadblock, or what are the two detours? Like a big one for us in Lugano was the sausage and case or bartender race. Both of us bartended when we got fired or furloughed from American, to where hasteful us would have been like, oh, let's just do bartender race. That sounds fun. We'll do wine. It'll be great. But then we're like, hold on. 12 bottles of wine and we have to get them from two different locations and carry them like sausage in cases, get them at one. It's like we learned in hindsight for 19 months of the race doesn't have to be as complicated and as stressful as it was. If we slow it down and take our time and like think about how do we put our best foot forward and like ignore everything else, and we really did that. We reflected on each leg, and kind of made corrections as we went.
It definitely showed. Like I said, when you guys came back, you did extremely well. Consistently, there was that improvement throughout. And I was going to ask you about the roadblocks, which were a little bit unbalanced. What was the strategy in regards to deciding who would do what roadblock?
So we were going to try and keep it 50-50 initially, but then we very quickly were like, we have to be more smart about this because just going back and forth one or the other, like we need to play to our strengths. And the strengths that we divvied up were she was going to be the muscle, like the physical stuff, because we're both physically capable, but she definitely has more upper body strength and it's just more getting the job done. Whereas the other challenges, which would be attention to detail, memorization, creativity, like I was going to be the strong one in that sense, just because I've watched the show before. So I know, just like the domades, I should have done that. Like I would have known you have to plate them the right way, or the
Mm.
veins have to be a certain way. But like that comes with being an avid fan and watcher of the show, which Raquel wasn't. So our strategy in it was if it's physical, Raquel's going to do it. If it's attention to detail, it's going to be me. But again, these roadblock clues, they don't say, hey, who wants to roll some domades? Hey, who wants to go bungee jump? They're very cryptic. So we had to learn when we get to a place and get a clue that says roadblock, let's look at our surroundings. Like, where are we? How can we use what our surroundings are to make the best guess of, is this going to be physical or is it going to be like detail oriented? So, again, you can have a strategy going into it. And that would be the biggest thing that I would say to anyone who hopefully wants to be on the Amazing Race, or how do you prepare? You can prepare, but these clues are so cryptic, it's almost hard to divvy up who's going to do what roadblock.
Michelle, if you're listening to this interview, that's what you need to pay attention to. Michelle has applied many a times for Australian Amazing Race, and she's gotten far in the
Good
casting
luck to
process
you.
a few times, and I'm sure she'll get on. So eventually, I think that, attention to detail was also, in my opinion, Ryan and Dusty's biggest flaw in the game, because they
Yes.
just seem to run at 120% all the time in every single challenge. And I'll definitely ask Dusty a little bit about that as we do the interview with them. One of the things I wanted to say is you keep underestimating yourself when it comes to strength. I was extremely impressed when you picked Raquel up to get the clue from out of the tree. And in that podcast, I said, Cayla for the challenge. I know the challenge CBS is coming pretty soon. I don't know if you're a fan of the challenge or any. You
Of
mentioned
course.
Survivor. You've mentioned some of the other shows out there. Reality TV in general, is this something? Have you closed the chapter on this? Are you open to other opportunities in the future?
I hope to God not. I haven't closed it. I am just I'm such a fan of this stuff. Again, my mom got me into it. I watched the challenge because of my mom, and I know that that appeals to, like, the younger crowd and stuff, but no, like, I hope to God that this is not the closing door for me. That's why I was so emotional at the end of Amazing Race. Like, I looked at this as like a once in a lifetime opportunity, and like now that I got a taste of it, I'm like, I can do this. Like, I can do this stuff. Um, but yeah, it's just like in my nature. Like, I'm self-deprecating. Like, I don't want to be that overconfident, cocky person. I was shocked Raquel couldn't lift me up. I'm like, okay, I know I ate a lot for dinner last night, but like, you should be able to lift me up on your legs. So I was like, I got this. No, I would like to consider myself a physical threat, but oh my God, again, I've been such a fan of Big Brother, Amazing Race, The Challenge. It's just so funny, being a fan and like a normal person. You don't ever picture yourself as getting that opportunity. So let me tell you, when that doorbell rings, my bags will be packed. I will be ready to go. I will at least tell you that, like, please.
Well, you did it the right way around. You went onto a show first and then started a podcast. I did it the wrong way around. I'm talking about the shows before I go on there, so I'm doomed from day one if any real super fan listens to any of the podcasts that I
Well,
talk
I'm
on.
sending the good vibes your way. I'm getting good energy. You would be entertaining. Like, I hope I see you. Maybe there'll be like a War of the Worlds Amazing Race, and you'll get on, the New Zealand one, and it'll be a whole thing.
The Challenge Australia, get at me.
Right?
I'll come. I'll come. I'll meet you at War of the Worlds when we do the challenge. So, but no, Cayla, it's been so much fun talking to you. I really appreciate you spending this time with me today. I know you've got a pretty busy schedule on that side. Do you want to give the fans maybe a little bit of a heads up where they can follow you, any projects that you
Yeah.
may be able to talk about that you can publicly make available? I know you've got quite a few things going on at the moment. This is your opportunity to plug it.
Yeah. So, I mean, personally, if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Cayla Lee. But yes, I do this podcast with Dusty, and originally it started to do like recaps of, our season of The Amazing Race, but we honestly just like fell in love with the experience, and we felt like we kind of had a knack for it. We're both fans of shows, and, kind of doing what you do. It's so inspiring. And it's Pit Stop Podcast. You can find it on YouTube, but we also have an Instagram as well for that. It's at pitstop_podcast_. And we're here to answer questions. Guys, again, we're the average Joes. This has been an incredible experience. And if you guys, don't get your answers from our podcast, if you decide to choose and listen to that, shoot us an email. It's pitstoppodcast33@gmail.com. It's Dusty Harris and myself. So one of us will get back to you, because yeah, this is such a cool thing, and we want to share it with the world. And I can't thank you enough personally, Chris, and just everyone out there who's just been an outpour of support and love and kindness. It's been unforgettable, honestly. Like, this has been so much fun.
Well, I'll keep a very close eye on your podcast channel. Obviously, I love
Yeah.
podcasting myself as well. So really looking forward to see what you guys talk about next on there. So guys, go and give them a follow. I will make sure to put the links in the description of this video as well, so you can easily find it. Cayla, this has been great. Just as I close off, if you
Yay.
stay for 1 minute, I'll have a chat with you afterwards as well.
Mhm.
Guys, please hit the subscribe button if you like this. Hit a like on this. We are on our way to 500 subscribers now on YouTube, which is a massive achievement for a small podcast. podcast that only started about 6 weeks ago. And when we get there, we are going to make an Australian Survivor buff available. I know it's not Amazing Race necessarily, but those things are very rare. They go for about $750 on eBay at the moment. So a decent chunk of change, even if you don't want to hold on to it, which I would recommend you do because there was only 100 of these made. So that will become available to one of the listeners of this podcast. We'll catch you guys next time. And thanks as always. Bye.